Hey class, I hope you're all staying safe and well. Today we're going to read together the first two chapters of the David and Goliath story. So I'll be in 1 Samuel 17 and 18, and then on tomorrow's lesson I'll post 19 and 20, and then the reading questions for this story will be due Sunday at 11:59. If you have any questions or need any help, just message me in the office from 10 to 4. But what I really want to focus on today is how quickly Saul and David's relationship unravels. And the last questions that we did for young David, Saul really liked David, and David played the harp for Saul whenever Saul was feeling afflicted, and David also became the armor bearer. But as David becomes more popular among the people, Saul seems threatened and really insecure by David's presence. And I see this happen a lot in the real world. So keep in mind our driving question: what can we learn from these characters? But I also want you to focus on the rising action of the story and the climax of how this battle really peaks, and then the falling action and the resolution. Remember, we're reading this as a short story, so keep in mind those literary plots as you read and listen. I'm going to start in chapter 17. Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Succoth in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes Dammim between Succoth and Ascah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elan and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with the valley between them. So I want to pause quickly and just beg you to please make sure that you watch that TED Talk that I posted yesterday. Even though there's no assignment that goes with it, it's really valuable to understand the setting, because it'll help you visualize where the Philistines are sitting and where the Israelites are sitting, and you can see the landscape and the geography of the land, and it really brings the story to life. So please make sure that you watch that. In verse 4, a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. He was over 9 feet tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze, weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistines said, "This day I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all of the other Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Now, let's connect real quick back to a previous part of the text. When Samuel the prophet anointed Saul as leader, it said 2 different times in that section of text that Saul was a head taller than everyone. So Goliath is 9 feet tall. Saul is still really insecure and threatened by him, even though Saul is much bigger than everyone. So Goliath must have been a really ominous presence. I'm in verse 12. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time he was old and well advanced in years. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistines came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. Now Jesse said to his son David, "Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers, and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are and bring back some assurance from them. They are with Saul and all of the men of Israel in the valley of Elan, fighting against the Philistines." Early in the morning, David left the flock with a shepherd, loaded up, and set out, as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and greeted his brothers. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his line and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. When the Israelites saw the man, they all ran from him in great fear. Now the Israelites had been saying, "Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel." David asked the men standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" So I really want to focus on that word uncircumcised. Remember the symbolism of that and the covenant, and how we've talked about the covenant with God and the Israelites, and being circumcised was a symbol that they belonged to Yahweh. And I also want you to pay attention to what's motivating the character. Is David motivated because he wants the wealth that King Saul offers, or is he motivated by faith that God can really help him defeat Goliath? So make sure that you listen and read carefully. In verse 27, they repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, "This is what will be done for the man who kills him." When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger and asked, "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those sheep in the desert? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle." Now, if you have read my sample journal, that's really the part of the text where I get my entire journal. I'm amazed at the sibling rivalry here. And unless you're an only child, I'm certain that you can relate to sibling rivalry in some way. David was the youngest and was still anointed by Samuel. And it's very obvious that his brothers are extremely jealous of that. In verse 29, "Now what have I done?" said David. "Can I even speak?" That rebuttal makes it clear to me that this is not the first time that David's older brothers have really unfairly addressed him. Love thinks the best. When you truly love someone and care about them, you're always imagining the best from them and not the worst. And it's very clear that David's brothers don't do that. In verse 30, he then turned the same manner, and the men answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a boy, and he has been a fighting man from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued my sheep from its mouth. When it turned to me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both a lion and a bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. "I cannot go in these," he said to Saul, "because I'm not used to them." So he took them off. Now try imagining that you're wearing full armor for the first time. It would be really heavy and clunky and uncomfortable. And I think that Saul means well here. He's trying to protect this young kid. But if you can't even really walk well, you're probably going to be very vulnerable in battle. So David ditches that and just takes his sling and his sword in to face this giant. In verse 40, then he took his staff in the hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, and put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in hand approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield-bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over, and he saw that he was only a boy, ruddy and handsome, and he despised him. And he said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Notice God's lowercase. That means that the Philistines were polytheistic pagan believers. "Come here," he said, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you with the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, who you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. Today I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the fields, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All of those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." Again, notice the motivation. David's motivation is not to get the reward and not to become famous. He wants to make Yahweh famous. He wants to just make his name renowned, not his own personal name. Verse 48. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine right on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, without a sword in his hand, and he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the scabbard. After he killed him, he cut off his head with a sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along Shaaraim road to Gath and Ekron. When the Philistines returned from chasing the Philistines, when the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. David took the Philistines' head and brought it into Jerusalem, and he put the Philistines' weapons in his own tent. As Saul watched David going out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is this young man?" Abner replied, "As surely as you live, O king, I don't know." The king said, "Find out whose son this young man is." As soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, and David still holding the Philistines, with David still holding the Philistine's head. "Whose son are you, young man?"